The wind, a hollow cry across the flatlands, rattled the window panes of Alara's small house. It was a sound she knew, a companion to the silence she had cultivated for 5 years, a shroud woven thread by thread since the night the old mill burned, taking Lila with it. Rain lashed the glass, distorting the dim, wavering light of the single lamp that pushed back the encroaching dark. Inside, the air was cool, smelling of damp wool and old paper, the scent of her solitude. Alara sat at her small table, needle glinting, patching a gray dress with a square of faded calico, a scrap from a life before. Her movements were precise, economical, each stitch a tiny anchor in the drift of time. The town of Redemption, nestled in the valley below, barely registered her existence. A flicker of its lights sometimes, on a clear night, a name whispered, if at all, like a ghost story. She preferred it this way. Words were currency, and she was bankrupt, or perhaps simply hoarding the few coins she had left. The storm intensified, a deeper growl in its throat. A particularly violent gust slammed against the north wall, making the timbers groan. Alara paused, her needle hovering. The old chest in the corner, Lila's chest, shifted. She had meant to move it for years, away from the dampness seeping through the ill-fitting window frame. Tonight, the storm's urgency seemed to mirror a restlessness inside her, a disquiet that had simmered beneath the surface of her quiet days. She rose, the patched dress falling to the floor, a soft sigh of fabric. The chest was heavy, laden with the remnants of a life extinguished too soon. Linens, a few books, trinkets Lila had cherished. Alara's hands, calloused from her needle but gentle, gripped the worn wood. She pulled. It scraped against the floorboards, a sound loud in the stillness, usually broken only by her breath or the click of her thimble. Something shifted inside the chest, a dull thud. Not fabric, not books. She knelt, the lamplight casting long, dancing shadows. Lila's riding boots lay atop a pile of folded clothes, mud still clinging to their soles, a testament to her sister's wilder spirit, her love for the open, untamed spaces beyond Redemption. Alara had never been able to bring herself to clean them. They were too much Lila, too much the past. She lifted one boot, heavier than it should be. She ran her fingers along the worn leather, the curve of the heel. Inside, tucked beneath the inner sole, her fingers met something stiff, unyielding, a folded piece of oilskin. Her breath caught. Slowly, carefully, she worked it free. The oilskin crackled as she unfolded it. A map, hand-drawn, lines faint but deliberate, tracing a path from the outskirts of Redemption, snaking towards the jagged teeth of the distant canyon lands. A single name was scrawled in Lila's familiar, hurried script at the map's terminus, Corvus, and beneath it, a tiny, almost invisible X. The wind howled, a lament or a warning. Alara stared at the map. The name, the mark, Corvus, a bird of ill omen, or a man? The fire. No one had asked questions. An accident, they'd said. Faulty lamp. Old wood. Quick and final. But Lila had been careful. Always. The map felt like a secret whispered from the grave, a tremor in the foundations of Alara's carefully constructed piece. Her heart, a long dormant thing, beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The rain hammered the roof, each drop a tiny nail sealing her into this moment of terrifying clarity. Just to see. Just to know. The thought, unbidden, took root. The canyon lands, where Lila's secrets, perhaps, lay buried deeper than her ashes. Alara traced the faint lines on the oilskin map, the lamplight making the ink gleam like a freshly opened wound. Corvus. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. The fire. She closed her eyes, and the smell of smoke, 5 years old but never truly faded, filled her senses. Lila, laughing, her bright hair a halo in the sun. Then Lila, a frantic silhouette against orange flame. A scream swallowed by the roar. The mill collapsing, a monstrous sigh of surrender. Alara had stood there, frozen, a doll with cut strings, while the heart of her world turned to embers. Afterwards, the silence from the townsfolk had been a different kind of burning. Pitying glances that slid away too quickly, hushed conversations that ceased when she drew near. Redemption had a short memory for inconvenient truths, a long shadow for unspoken blames. They had wanted it to be an accident, simple, clean, and she, in her grief, had let them. She had retreated into the shell of her small house, into the rhythmic solace of her needle, mending rents in fabric, while the tear in her own life remained raw and gaping. Now, this map, this name. It was a loose thread, and she, the seamstress, felt an undeniable urge to pull. Lila had been restless in those final months, quieter. Shadows in her eyes that Elara, lost in her own small routines, had failed to question. There were hushed meetings, late returns from her rides, the scent of unfamiliar pipe tobacco sometimes clinging to her clothes. Elara had dismissed it as Lila's usual adventurous spirit, her yearning for something more than redemption offered. But the map suggested a purpose, a destination. Not just wandering, but a specific hidden path. The boots. Lila had loved those boots. Worn them every day she rode out, towards the canyons, towards the wild places where the town's grip loosened. Had this secret been there all along, pressing against the sole of her foot with every step, a silent testament to a journey unfinished? Elara's fingers trembled as she refolded the oilskin. The storm outside seemed to have entered her, a turmoil of grief, anger, and a nascent, fragile hope. Hope for what? Justice? Understanding? Or merely an end to the not knowing that had gnawed at her for half a decade? The town offered no answers. It had buried Lila, along with the mill's charred timbers. If there was truth, it lay out there, along that inked line, in the harsh beauty of the canyon lands, under the shadow of the name Corvus. The image of Lila's face, bright and defiant, flickered in her mind. Lila would not have wanted this silence. She would have raged. She would have sought. Elara had forgotten how to rage, her voice a rusty hinge. But perhaps she could still seek. The thought of leaving Redemption, the only home she'd known, even in its cold comfort, sent a shiver of fear through her. But the thought of staying, of letting this map remain another buried secret, was now unbearable. The fire had taken Lila's voice, her future. It had nearly taken Elara's too, smothering it under a blanket of sorrow and silence. But this map, it was a word from Lila, a direction, a beginning, perhaps to an end. She looked at her reflection in the dark window pane, a pale, haunted face. For 5 years, she had been a ghost in her own life. Maybe it was time to walk among the living again, or at least among the ghosts who had something left to say. Dawn broke gray and grudging, the storm having wept itself out, leaving behind a world washed clean and smelling of damp earth and bruised sage. Elara hadn't slept. The map lay open on the table, a silent accusation. She moved with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. From a small coffer, she took the few coins she possessed, savings hoarded from mending the town's occasional tears. Not much, but enough for necessities. She packed a small canvas satchel, a waterskin, a loaf of dark bread, a knife, a flint and steel, a thick woolen shawl. Lila's shawl, the one with the small, almost invisible darn near the fringe where Elara had mended it after a snag on a briar. Her fingers traced the mended spot. A connection. She put on her sturdiest boots, not Lila's. Those were too precious, too much a part of the quest itself. She would carry them, wrapped carefully. The house felt emptier already, as if sensing her departure. She ran a hand along the scarred tabletop, a farewell to the familiar. No notes, no explanations. Redemption had offered none for Lila. She owed it nothing in return. As the first watery sunlight touched the peaks of the eastern hills, Elara stepped outside. The air was cold, biting, but fresh. She breathed it in, a deep, shuddering breath that seemed to reach parts of her lungs long unused. She did not look back at the small house. nor at the town slumbering below. Her gaze was fixed on the rugged line of hills that led towards the canyons, the direction indicated by the map clutched in her hand. The first few miles were across familiar pasture land, now sodden and slick. The path shown on Lila's map was little more than a game trail, overgrown and indistinct in places. Her town-softened muscles protested, but she pushed on, driven by a cold, quiet urgency. The landscape began to change. The gentle slopes gave way to rougher, rock-strewn terrain. Juniper and pinyon pine clung to the thin soil, their scent sharp and clean. The silence here was different from the silence of her house. It was vast, alive, filled with the whisper of wind through dry grass, the distant caw of a raven. Loneliness was a familiar cloak, but out here, it felt less suffocating, more a part of the grand indifference of nature. As dusk began to paint the sky in hues of bruised purple and fading orange, she found a small alcove sheltered by an overhang of rock, as Lila's map suggested for a first stop. It offered little comfort, but some protection from the wind that had picked up again, colder now, carrying the scent of distant snow. She built a small fire, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the rock face. The bread was dry, the water metallic from the skin, but it was sustenance. She unwrapped Lila's boots, laying them beside her. In the firelight, the mud seemed to glow. She thought of Lila, sitting perhaps in this very spot. What had she been thinking? Fearing? Hoping for? The questions were a dull ache. Fear, a cold serpent, coiled in Ilara's belly. She was a seamstress, not an adventurer. What was she doing? Chasing a ghost into this wilderness? The urge to turn back, to retreat to the known misery of her solitude, was strong. But the image of the map, the name Corvus, held her. It was a hook, baited with the dearest part of her past. She had to know, even if the knowing destroyed the fragile peace she had built, just to see, just far enough. The wind sighed through the rocks, like a voice, almost like Lila's voice, urging her on. Or perhaps it was just the wind. 2 days she walked, the landscape growing wilder, more unforgiving. The game trail Lila had marked sometimes vanished entirely, forcing Ilara to cast about, her heart sinking with each dead end, then lifting a little when she found a blaze on a tree, a carefully placed stone. Signs her sister had indeed passed this way. Her feet were blistered, her shoulders ached from the satchel. The solitude pressed in, no longer vast and impersonal, but tinged with a vulnerability she hadn't anticipated. On the third morning, as she negotiated a steep, scree-covered slope, a shadow detached itself from a cluster of weathered pines ahead. A man, tall, lean, dressed in hides and worn denim, a rifle held loosely in one hand. His face was weathered, like the landscape itself, eyes the color of a winter sky, missing nothing. Ilara froze, her hand instinctively going to the knife at her belt. He didn't move, just watched her, his expression unreadable. Silence stretched, broken only by the wind whistling through the crags. Lost? His voice was low, rough, like stones grinding together. Not unkind, but not welcoming either. Ilara found her own voice, rusty from disuse. No. A single word, costing her more than she expected. He tilted his head slightly. This ain't a forgiving trail for someone alone. His gaze flickered to her satchel, her town boots. She said nothing, her chin lifting a fraction. She wouldn't be deterred, not by him, not by anyone. He seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. Name's Silas. He offered no more. Ilara hesitated. Giving her name felt like giving away a piece of herself, something she hadn't done in years. Ilara. It felt strange on her tongue. Silas's eyes held hers for a long moment. She saw no threat in them, but a deep, abiding weariness, a solitude that mirrored her own. Headed into the canyons? He asked. She nodded, clutching Lila's map, hidden now within her bodice. Dangerous country. Best to have someone who knows it. His words were a statement, not an offer, yet they hung in the air. Ilara looked at him, truly looked. There were lines of sorrow etched around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders, that spoke of burdens carried for a long time. He had ghosts, she sensed, just as she did. Perhaps that was why he understood the need for silence, for unasked questions. "You guide?" she managed. The words clipped. He gave a curt nod. "Sometimes, for a price." Ilara thought of her few coins. "I don't have much." Silas's gaze swept over her again, lingering for a moment on her hands, roughened but clearly not accustomed to this kind of labor. "Some debts ain't paid in coin." The cryptic remark hung in the air. He wasn't looking at her when he said it, his eyes fixed on the distant, hazy line of the canyons. What debt did he imagine she could pay? Or was he speaking of his own? "The map," Ilara said, her voice barely a whisper, deciding on a sliver of truth. "I have a map, my sister's. It leads somewhere in there." Silas's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, understanding, recognition, passed through his eyes. He knew these lands. Maybe he knew of trails not meant to be found. "A sister's map," he said softly, as if tasting the words. He looked towards the canyons again, then back at her. "All right, I'll take you where it leads." He didn't ask why. He didn't ask about her sister. His acceptance was as spare and unadorned as the landscape around them. A silent compact formed between them, two solitary figures against a vast, indifferent wilderness. Ilara felt a stirring of something other than fear or grief. Not trust, not yet, but a recognition. A shared understanding of unspoken sorrows, of paths walked alone. Perhaps, she thought, this was how one began to reclaim a voice, not by speaking, but by being heard in the silences. They walked. Silas set a steady, ground-eating pace that Ilara struggled to match, yet he never pushed her beyond her limits, sensing her fatigue before she voiced it, which she never did. He moved through the landscape with a quiet grace, a part of it, like the wind or the stones. He spoke little, and when he did, his words were as sparse and essential as the desert plants around them. "Water here," he'd murmur, pointing to a seep Ilara would have missed. "Watch your footing." A quiet caution before a treacherous patch of loose rock. His silence was different from her own. Hers was a retreat, a shield. His seemed a communion, a deep listening to the land itself. Ilara found herself observing him, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, the set of his jaw, the subtle shifts in his posture that signaled awareness of things unseen, unheard by her. He never asked about Lila, or the map, or why she sought this place marked Corvus's. His restraint was a gift, allowing her to carry her grief and her fragile purpose without the burden of explanation. In his quiet presence, the edges of her own tightly guarded solitude began to soften. She found herself breathing more easily, the constant tension in her shoulders easing a fraction. Sometimes she would catch his eye, a fleeting glance of shared understanding, when a hawk circled overhead, or when the setting sun painted the canyon walls in breathtaking, fiery hues. No words were exchanged, none were needed. The landscape itself seemed to speak for them, its raw beauty a balm, its harshness a reflection of their inner worlds. At night, they camped under star-strewn skies, so vast and brilliant they stole her breath. Silas would build a small, efficient fire. They would eat in silence, the only sounds the crackle of flames and the distant call of a coyote. Ilara would take out Lila's boots, place them near the warmth. Sometimes, she would run her hand over the worn leather, a silent conversation with her sister. One evening, Silas broke the quiet. "She knew these lands well? Your sister?" Ilara started, surprised by the directness, however gentle. She looked at him, his face illuminated by the firelight, shadows carving deep hollows. "She loved them," Ilara said, her voice surprisingly steady. "She found a freedom here." Silas nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Some do." He poked the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the darkness. "And some find other things." The words were heavy, hinting at knowledge he didn't share. Ilara felt a familiar chill. What had Lila found? And what had it cost her? She remembered fragments, whispers from the past. Lila, humming a strange melancholic tune Ilara had never heard before. Lila, with a smudge of unusual red clay on her cheek, quickly wiped away. Lila, her eyes bright with a secret excitement, or perhaps fear. Ilara had been too wrapped in her own small world of stitches and seams. The map was becoming more than just lines on oilskin. Each day, as they drew closer to the area marked Corvus, it felt heavier, more potent. Silas pointed to a notch in a distant ridge. That's Raven's Beak. The map will likely lead through the pass just south of it. His knowledge was unnerving, yet reassuring. He was a guide, yes, but he was also a guardian of this place, of its secrets. Ilara felt a flicker of her old self, the part that had been buried under layers of grief. A question formed, tentative, fragile. Did you ever see her? My sister? Out here? Silas was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the fire. Maybe. Many pass through these lands. Faces blur. A non-answer, yet Ilara sensed an evasion, a careful sidestepping. He knew more, or suspected more. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of dust and something else, something wild and untamed. Lila had been drawn to that wildness, and perhaps it had consumed her. The silence returned, but it was different now, charged with unspoken things, with the growing certainty that Lila's death was a far more tangled thread than a simple, tragic accident. The air grew colder as they climbed higher into the foothills of the canyons. The terrain became more broken, the trail often a mere suggestion. Ilara noticed Silas's gaze becoming more watchful, his movements more cautious. He would often pause, listening, his head tilted, as if discerning whispers on the wind that she could not hear. One afternoon, as they rounded a narrow bend, the trail hemmed in by sheer rock on one side and a steep drop on the other, Silas stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. Ilara froze behind him. He knelt, his fingers tracing something in the dust. A footprint. Not hers. Not his. Fresh. Large. Made by a heavy boot. Not the worn moccasins or light footwear of a casual wanderer. Company, Silas said, his voice flat. He looked back along their trail, then ahead. Been following us. Since yesterday, maybe. A cold dread seeped into Ilara. She hadn't noticed. She had been lost in her thoughts, in the rhythm of the journey. But Silas, attuned to the slightest dissonance in the wilderness, had felt their pursuer. Who? She breathed, the word barely audible. Silas shrugged, but his eyes were hard. Someone who doesn't want us on this trail. Or someone who wants what you're looking for. He rose, his hand resting briefly on the stock of his rifle. We move faster. There was a new urgency in his pace, a tension that communicated itself to Ilara. The quiet companionship of the previous days was overlaid now with a shared sense of threat. The beauty of the landscape seemed to sharpen, its edges more dangerous. Every shadow could conceal a watcher. Every rustle of leaves could be a footfall. That night, their campfire was smaller, smokeless, tucked deep within a narrow ravine. Sleep was elusive for Ilara. The wind seemed to carry menacing whispers. She thought of the name Corvus. A predator. Was he watching them now? Waiting? Silas sat with his back to a rock, rifle across his knees, apparently asleep, but Ilara knew he was not. His stillness was that of a hunter, alert to the slightest sound. She felt a strange mixture of fear and a hardening resolve. She had come this far. She would not be turned back by shadows, by unseen threats. Lila's memory, Lila's unanswered questions, propelled her forward. A flashback, sharp and unwelcome. The night of the fire. Men's voices, harsh, angry, muffled by the roar of the flames. She had dismissed them at the time as rescuers, firefighters, but now the memory took on a more sinister hue. Had they been there before the flames took hold? Had Lila not been alone? The map, clutched in her hand inside her shawl, felt like a brand. It was more than a guide. It was a target. The next day, the signs of their pursuer became more overt. A deliberately broken branch at a fork in the trail, pointing them in the wrong direction. A test, perhaps, or a clumsy attempt at misdirection that Silas easily spotted. Later, a glint of metal high on a ridge overlooking their path, disappearing as quickly as it appeared. Someone was indeed watching. Someone patient. Someone who knew these lands almost as well as Silas. "They know the map leads here," Silas said, his voice grim, as they paused to drink from a small, clear spring. "Or they know who your sister was." Alara looked at him, her fear a cold knot in her stomach. "What did she do, Silas? What was she involved in?" He met her gaze, his own troubled. "Some things are best left buried, Ilara, for a reason." "Not this," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Not Lila." He sighed, a sound like wind through dry reeds. "She had a strong sense of justice, your sister. And these canyons, they hide more than just rock and shadow. They hide secrets men will kill to protect." The admission, though veiled, confirmed Ilara's deepest fears. Lila hadn't just stumbled upon something, she had been seeking it, and it had led to her death. The name Corvus loomed larger in her mind, no longer just a word on a map, but the embodiment of the danger that had stalked her sister and now stalked her. The path ahead was not just a journey to a place, but a journey into the heart of that danger. They pressed on, the air thinning, the silence amplifying every crack of a twig, every dislodged stone. The canyon walls rose around them, immense, ancient, indifferent to their small human dramas. Ravensbeak, the landmark Silas had pointed out, now loomed directly ahead, a stark silhouette against the pale sky. According to Lila's map, their destination lay in the labyrinth of smaller ravines and box canyons at its base. Silas moved with even greater caution, his eyes missing nothing, his body a coiled spring. Ilara felt the change in him, the heightened alertness that spoke of imminent confrontation. Her own senses were stretched, taut, every nerve ending alive with a fearful anticipation. The map led them into a narrow, winding canyon, its walls so close in places they could touch both sides. The light grew dim, the air still and cold. Then the canyon opened slightly into a small, hidden amphitheater of rock, and there, nestled against the cliff face, almost invisible until they were upon it, was a ruin. Not a cabin, but the crumbling stone walls of what might once have been a small shelter or a prospector's store. Part of its roof had collapsed, and desert scrub grew defiantly from its earthen floor. An X on Lila's map corresponded perfectly with this desolate spot. "This is it," Ilara whispered, her voice awed and apprehensive. Silas nodded, his gaze sweeping the rim of the canyon above them, checking for watchers. He gestured for her to stay put while he scouted the immediate area. Ilara waited, her heart pounding. This was where Lila had come. This was what Corvus meant. What secrets did these stones hold? Silas returned, his expression grim. "Clear for now, but they won't be far behind." He looked at the ruin. What did she expect to find here? Ilara didn't know. She entered the ruin slowly. The air inside was heavy, smelling of dust, decay, and something else. A faint, lingering scent of old smoke. Not wood smoke. Something acrid, chemical, like the mill after the fire. Her eyes scanned the small space. Debris littered the floor. A rusted pickaxe head. Broken pottery. Then, tucked into a crevice between two large stones, almost hidden by a fall of rubble, she saw it. A small, leather-bound ledger. Her breath caught. She reached for it, her fingers trembling. It was damp, mildewed in places, but intact. She opened it. Lila's handwriting. Dates. Figures. Names. Not just Corvus, but others. Records of transactions, shipments, meetings. Words like assay, or, discrepancy. And then, a series of entries, more frantic, less neat. Accusations. Threats. A name circled repeatedly. Alderman Thorne, a prominent man in Redemption, owner of the now silent freight company, a man whose condolences after the fire had felt oily, insincere. Ilara's blood ran cold. Lila hadn't just stumbled upon corruption. She had been documenting it. Illegal mining, perhaps, or theft. Something valuable enough to kill for. Tucked into the back of the ledger was a folded piece of paper. A letter. To Ilara. My dearest Ilara, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened. And Corvus, or those he works for, have silenced me. I didn't want to involve you, to bring this shadow near your light. But I could not stand by. Redemption is built on lies. Its foundations rotten. They are stealing from the land, from the future, and Thorn is at the heart of it. Corvus is his enforcer, a brutal man. The proof is in this ledger. Take it. Find someone honest, if such a person still exists. Don't let them bury the truth with me. Forgive me for the danger I brought to your door. Live, Ilara. Truly live. All my love, Lila. Tears blurred Ilara's vision. The grief, fresh and raw, tore through her. Lila's courage, her sacrifice, and her own blindness. Silas was at her shoulder, his presence a steady anchor. What is it? She handed him the ledger, the letter. He read them, his face hardening into granite. Thorn, he said. The name a curse. I knew he was a snake. Didn't know how deep his poison ran. He looked at Ilara, his eyes filled with a grim understanding. This ledger, this is why they burned the mill. Why they want you silenced. A sound from above, a dislodged pebble skittering down the canyon wall. Silas reacted instantly, pulling Ilara down behind the crumbling wall, his rifle already aimed. They're here. The silence that followed the skittering pebble was absolute. A held breath. Then, a voice, smooth and laced with false congeniality, echoed from the canyon rim. An admirable effort, little seamstress. Quite the journey for someone so delicate. Ilara recognized the voice. Not Corvus, not yet. It was Deputy Finch, Thorn's man in redemption. Always too eager with a smile, his eyes too shifty. He was supposed to uphold the law, not serve as the muscle for its corruptors. Silas kept his rifle trained on the rim, his body still. Show yourself, Finch, or are you too much a coward to face us? Finch laughed, a hollow sound. No need for unpleasantries, Tracker. We just want what she has. The book. Alderman Thorn would be very grateful for its return. He's a generous man. Generous with what isn't his, Silas retorted, his voice tight with contempt. Like Lila's life? Ilara whispered, the words torn from her. Her hand tightened on the ledger, now tucked inside her bodice next to Lila's map. It was more than paper and ink. It was her sister's final act, her legacy. She would not surrender it. Another voice. This one deeper, colder cut through the air. Enough talk. The girl, the book, or we burn you out just like her sister. Corvus. The name was a physical blow. Ilara saw him then. A figure stepping to the edge of the rim, silhouetted against the sky. Broad, powerful, a face lost in shadow, but radiating an unmistakable menace. He held a burning torch, its flames licking hungrily at the air, a horrifying echo of the mill fire. Fear, stark and primal, threatened to paralyze Ilara. The smell of smoke, real this time, mixed with the phantom scent from her nightmares. But then, Lila's words from the letter resonated in her mind. Live, Ilara. Truly, live. And something shifted within her. The fear did not vanish, but a cold anger rose to meet it, an anger that had been simmering for 5 long years. She looked at Silas. His jaw was set, his eyes narrowed. He was ready to fight, to die here if necessary. But this was her fight, Lila's fight. No more burning, Ilara said, her voice surprisingly clear, carrying in the still air. She stood, slowly, deliberately, stepping out from behind the ruined wall. Silas hissed her name, a warning, but she ignored it. She faced the canyon rim, faced Corvus. You won't get it, she called out, her voice trembling but firm. You won't silence her. Not anymore. Corvus laughed, a brutal, humorless sound. Brave words, empty ones. He gestured with the torch. We have patience, and more fire. Ilara's mind raced. They were trapped. Finch, Corvus, and how many others? They couldn't fight their way out. But Lila had not been a fighter of brute force. She had been clever. The ledger was proof. What else had Lila known about this place? The acrid smell from the ruin. Ilara's eyes darted around the small amphitheater. The way the rock strata slanted, the pattern of erosion, something clicked. A memory of Lila, excited, talking about a geological survey map she'd seen, old mining claims, forgotten tunnels. Silas, she whispered urgently, not taking her eyes off Corvus. The back wall of the ruin. Could there be a passage? An old mine shaft? Silas's eyes flickered towards the ruin, then back to her, a spark of understanding. He'd seen such things before in these canyons, hidden by rockfalls, forgotten for generations. It was a slim chance, a desperate hope. Maybe, he breathed. Corvus was saying something, another threat, but Ilara barely heard him. Her focus was on the ruin, on Lila's desperate gamble. If there was a way out, Lila would have known it. Create a diversion, she murmured to Silas. I need to look. He nodded curtly, his gaze fixed on the men above. He understood. This was not a surrender, but a strategic retreat, if a path could be found. The alternative was unthinkable. He raised his rifle slightly. You want the book, Corvus? Come and get it. A shot rang out from the rim, kicking up dust near Silas's feet. He didn't flinch. This was the opening Ilara needed. As Silas drew their fire, Ilara scrambled back into the ruin, her heart hammering against her ribs. The acrid smell was stronger near the back wall, where the rock met the crumbling stone structure. Dust and debris choked the air. She ran her hands frantically along the cool, uneven surface, searching for any sign, any opening. Lila's words, "Don't let them bury the truth with me," echoed in her mind. Another shot from above, closer this time. Silas returned fire, his shot precise, making one of the figures on the rim duck back hastily. "Ilara, quickly!" His voice was strained. Her finger snagged on something, not rock, but a piece of splintered wood, almost buried. She pulled. It resisted, then gave way with a groan, revealing a dark, narrow opening, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. An old ventilation shaft, perhaps, or a prospector's escape tunnel. A gust of cool, damp air, smelling of deep earth, breathed from the darkness. Hope, sharp and potent, surged through her. "Silas, here!" she cried, her voice hoarse. He fired one last shot, then sprinted towards the ruin, ducking low as bullets peppered the stone around him. He reached her side, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He peered into the dark opening. "Can't see where it leads." "It leads away from them," Ilara said, her resolve hardening. Lila knew. This must be why she chose this place for the ledger. It was a desperate gamble, but it was their only one. Corvus's furious shouts echoed from outside. "They're trying to run. Smoke them out." Silas didn't hesitate. "You first, I'll cover." He pushed her gently towards the opening. Ilara squeezed into the narrow passage, the rough rock scraping her clothes, the darkness absolute. She could hear Silas behind her, returning fire, the sounds deafening in the confined space of the ruin. Then he was scrambling in after her, pulling a loose boulder to partially obscure the entrance as best he could in the frantic moment. The air in the tunnel was cold, stale. They moved by touch, Ilara leading, her hands outstretched, feeling for obstacles. The passage twisted, turned, sloped downwards. Behind them, they could hear muffled shouts, the crackle of flames. Corvus was making good on his threat, trying to burn them out of the ruin. But they were already in the belly of the earth, Lila's final, clever provision. Smoke began to seep into the tunnel, acrid and stinging. Ilara's lungs burned. Panic clawed at her, but she pushed it down. Lila's courage flowed through her, a steadying current. They had to keep moving. The ledger, pressed against her heart, was a physical reminder of what was at stake. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel began to slope upwards. A faint glimmer of light appeared ahead. Feeble, but unmistakably daylight. Ilara stumbled towards it, Silas close behind, coughing from the smoke. The opening was small, concealed by a thicket of overgrown brush on a steep hillside, well away from the ruin and the canyon where Corvus and his men were. They burst out into the clean air, gasping, soot-stained, but alive. Below them, in the distance, they could see smoke billowing from the direction of the ruined shelter. Corvus would soon realize they were gone. They weren't safe yet, but they were free of the immediate trap. Ilara looked at Silas, his face grimed with soot, his eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and grim determination. "Lila," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "She saved us," Silas nodded, his gaze sweeping their surroundings. "She was a remarkable woman." He looked towards the distant, hazy outline of redemption. "Thorn won't give up. He knows what that ledger contains." Elara knew. The confrontation wasn't over. It had merely shifted terrain. But now, she wasn't just a seamstress running from ghosts. She was the keeper of Lila's truth, and she had found her voice, even if it had been forged in fire and shadow. The ashes of the ruin were behind them, but a new dawn, however uncertain, lay ahead. They didn't rest for long. Silas knew these hidden pathways, the arteries of the canyons, far better than Thorn's men. He led Elara on a punishing trek, avoiding common trails, using the terrain to their advantage, putting as much distance as possible between them and Corvus. The ledger felt like a living thing against Elara's skin, a heavy weight of responsibility. Lila's careful script, her brave accusations, were a testament that could dismantle Thorn's corrupt empire, but only if it reached the right hands. And who, in redemption or beyond, was truly honest? The question plagued Elara as they moved. The sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of blood orange and deep violet. They found shelter in a shallow cave, high on a ridge overlooking the sprawling, darkening land. Silas built no fire. The risk of discovery was too great. They ate, sparingly, cold rations, the silence between them heavy with unspoken plans and lingering fear. "Thorn will have men watching every road back to redemption," Silas said, breaking the quiet, his voice low. "And even if we get through, who do you trust there?" Elara thought of the faces in redemption. Mayor Hemlock, easily swayed by Thorn's money. Sheriff Brody, competent but weary, perhaps already in Thorn's pocket, or simply unwilling to challenge such a powerful man. "I don't know," she admitted, the truth a bitter pill. Lila's letter. She hoped for someone honest. Silas looked out at the vastness. Honesty is a rare ore in these parts, especially when gold, or whatever Thorn is truly after, is involved. He paused. "There's a marshal out of Prescott. Stern, but fair. Name of Gideon Cole. He's not easily bought. If you can get that ledger to him." Prescott was a long way. A dangerous journey, especially now. But it was a flicker of hope. Elara nodded slowly. "How?" Silas considered. "I can get you as far as the old stagecoach trail south of the canyons. From there, it's a harder road, less cover. You'd be more exposed." He looked at her, his gaze direct. "You'd have to go on alone from there. My presence. I have my own shadows, Elara." Drawing Cole's attention might bring them into the light too soon. His own ghosts. She understood. He had already risked so much for her, for Lila's memory. "You've done more than enough, Silas," she said, her voice filled with a gratitude that words couldn't fully express. He gave a rare, faint smile. "Lila? She reminded me of someone I once knew. Someone who also believed in fighting for what's right, no matter the cost. A shared sorrow, a shared respect." The silence that followed was companionable, a bond forged in shared danger and unspoken understanding. Elara took out Lila's boots, which she had managed to keep with her through the escape. She cleaned the soot from them as best she could with a corner of her shawl. A small, symbolic act. She was no longer just preserving her sister's memory. She was carrying forward her fight. The fire had tried to consume everything, to turn truth to ash. But Lila had planted a seed, a map, a ledger, and from those ashes, something was beginning to grow. Courage, purpose, a voice. As dawn approached, gray and uncertain, they prepared to move again. Elara felt a change within herself. The fear was still there, a cold undercurrent, but it no longer owned her. She was the seamstress who had followed a thread of hope into the heart of darkness, and she had emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. The journey ahead was fraught with peril, but she would face it. For Lila, for herself, for the quiet triumph of a truth that refused to stay buried. The journey to the old stagecoach trail was arduous. Silas pushed them hard, his knowledge of the land their greatest shield. They moved mostly at night, resting during the hottest parts of the day in hidden clefts or under dense juniper cover. Ilara learned to read the subtle signs of the wilderness, to move with a quietness she hadn't known she possessed. Her body, once soft from years of indoor work, hardened to the demands of the trail. Her spirit, too, found a new resilience. 2 days later, under a sky bruised with the colors of an impending sunrise, they reached the edge of the canyon lands. Below them, snaking through the arid plains, was the faint, double track of the disused stagecoach road. It looked exposed, vulnerable after the protective embrace of the canyons. "This is as far as I can take you safely," Silas said, his voice low. "Prescott lies that way." He pointed south. "Keep to the low ground when you can. Travel light. Travel fast." Ilara nodded, her throat tight. This was it. The parting of ways. She turned to him, wanting to express the depth of her gratitude, but words felt inadequate. "Silas?" He met her gaze, his winter sky eyes holding a rare warmth. "You have your sister's strength, Ilara, and her courage. You'll know what to do." He reached into his own worn satchel and pulled out a small, heavy pouch. "This will help, for supplies, for passage if you need it." It was coin, more than she had ever held. "I can't," she began. "Lila would want you to have it," he said simply, pressing it into her hand. "Consider it payment, for reminding an old tracker that some fights are still worth having." He gave a curt nod, a gesture that was both farewell and blessing. Then, without another word, he turned and melted back into the rocks and shadows of the canyon lands, becoming once more a part of the wilderness he called home. Ilara watched him go, a solitary figure disappearing into the landscape that had both threatened and sheltered her. She felt a pang of loss, a sense of being truly alone again. But this solitude was different. It was not the isolation of grief, but the quiet strength of purpose. She looked south, towards the uncertain road to Prescott. The ledger, secure against her, felt like both a burden and a shield. The town of redemption, with its secrets and its indifference, lay behind her. Ahead lay danger, uncertainty, but also the possibility of justice, of honoring Lila's sacrifice. She took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling her lungs. She was no longer just the seamstress who kept to herself. The fire had tried to take her voice, to bury her in ashen silence. But Lila's map had led her out, and Silas had shown her a path. Now she had her own journey to complete. She adjusted her satchel, Lila's boots tied securely to it, and took her first step onto the stagecoach trail. The sun was rising, casting long shadows, painting the land in hues of nascent hope. She walked with a steady pace, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The road ahead was long, and she knew Thorn and Corvus would not give up easily. There might be other watchers, other dangers. But Ilara carried within her a quiet fire now, a flame of resolve that no darkness could extinguish. She would see this through. She would find Marshal Gideon Cole. She would give Lila's truth its voice. And in doing so, she would fully reclaim her own. You see, sometimes a map doesn't just lead to a place, but to the person you were meant to become. And sometimes, the deepest silence holds the most important words, waiting only for the courage to speak them.